Hi, this video is showing how to do the time series portion of homework 4 using Excel. What we have open here is the same sample data I used for the regression analysis demonstration. Again, the same type of information, forecasting sales for recreational vehicle, but the numbers are different than in your homework. So follow the same steps, but don't you won't get the same results, obviously. The only thing different from this worksheet and the one in your homework is that I have put the 3 formulas you'll need for this forecasting technique on the spreadsheet here, just so you can see those as I refer to them. For the initial forecast, I think I mentioned this in the homework assignment, and there's numbers filled in your sheet. What we want to do is have our initial forecast equal to actual sales. It doesn't really make a lot of difference what you start with here. By the time you get 10 or 15 forecasts, it really makes little difference what you started with. But the convention is to start with initial forecast equal to your actual sales. To find this initial trend, I just made a line graph of sales from 1 through 89, all the sales, and then I fit a trend line to it in Microsoft Excel, and the formula showed that the average trend was a decrease of 0.05 units per month. So I just went ahead and used that as the initial trend. But I could start with 0, or I could start at 5, or whatever number I wanted to put in there. It would make a slight difference on the first few forecasts, but then it would really make little difference because this initial forecast would have a very low weight, not weighted very heavily. More recent forecasts would be weighted heavily. So I just put 34.05 here so that my final forecast, which if you can see this, if you're forecasting one time period in the future, so imagine we're at week 0, month 0, trying to forecast for August, or month 1, our forecast would have been S plus T. I would have been 1 week in the future. So for the first, 89, 90 forecast you're creating, you'll be creating a forecast 1 week in the future, 1 month in the future, rather. The last 2 forecasts you'll want to go ahead and forecast further into the future, and that's where this I will become a factor. So we can go ahead and put this formula in. So what we're looking at here is forecast 0 plus 1, I is 1 and T is 0, equals S, the initial forecast from week 0 plus 1, week 1. So we say equals that initial forecast plus 1, we could just leave that out, times the trend from week 0 plus month 0 plus 1. So the trend from August of 2001. Right. And once we have that formula entered, we could actually go ahead and just copy this formula all the way down to 1 month past our last observation. So January 2009, and I want you to forecast through March 2009. So we'll get to these last 2 forecasts in a little bit. Obviously these are all showing 0, but as I fill in these other 2 cells, it will refer back to these. Okay, so that's the first step. Could be the first step. A forecast error. You could calculate it here. It doesn't really matter because you didn't actually make a forecast, but you could include that. It would, again, make little difference overall. So the next step is to figure out the formula for the initial forecast. Now that's this formula here. So ST plus 1, or 1 plus 1. So we're in August 2001, wanting to forecast 1 month into the future to September. There'd be an alpha, actual sales from month T, in this case month August of 2001, plus 1 minus alpha times the forecast from August 2001. Right. But as we copy this formula down to different months, so S12 plus 1, S57 plus 1, we always want to use the same alpha. Okay, so our initial value of alpha is 0.2. But to make it simple to implement this forecasting technique, what we can do is go ahead and click on the cell that has the value for alpha, and click over here in the name box, and we'll just name that alpha. And what that allows us to do is very easily refer to this same cell every time we copy the formula down. Always refer to cell K1, but instead of having to put the dollar signs like I showed you before, we can just point to this, and when we copy it, it's going to refer to the cell called alpha. While we're at it, I'll go ahead and name this next cell beta, because again, beta will be consistent for every forecast we make. Right. And if our formulas we enter refer back to these values of alpha and beta, we can just change these values to update our forecast. Once we've calculated error and mean absolute percent error, those cells will also update so we can see the impact to our error of adjusting alpha and beta. And we'll actually use Solver to optimize these values of alpha and beta, or come close to optimizing them. Okay, so the first step is to enter this initial forecast for observation 2. So this is going to be S1 plus 1, or 2. So it's going to be equal to alpha times actual sales from week 1. T is 1 in this first example. And once we do the first one, we can just copy this formula down. We won't have to worry about this from here on out. So alpha times the previous cells plus 1 minus alpha in parentheses. Again, make sure you refer to this cell and don't just type in the number so that it updates your forecast. 1 minus alpha times the forecast from the previous month. In this case, this F of 1, forecast of month 1. Right? And that's our whole formula. We can then go ahead and copy this formula down all the way down through January of 09. Because using this formula, we can only calculate 1 month into the future. Right, this is the last S we can calculate because S uses the previous month's data. Again, these will update a little bit when we adjust T. It's going to adjust this forecast, and everything will update, and we'll have our final forecasting technique. Right, so as long as you refer to this cell, you could also type in K1 with a $K, $2, and instead of naming your cell, but it's easier to just name these cells. Okay, then we'll go on to this formula for the trend. Basically, what we have with this formula is some constant, beta instead of alpha in this case. Alpha and beta can be the same, they can be different. This ST plus 1 minus ST, this is basically your actual trend. What is the increase from 1 month to the next? Plus 1 minus beta times your forecast trend. T was a forecast trend. Right. So again, we're looking at T1 plus 1. So for month 2, using data from month 1. So we can go ahead and say equals beta times, sure use parentheses here, it will mess up your calculations, ST plus 1, so that's the initial forecast for month 2, minus the initial forecast for month 1, plus 1 minus beta, again using the parentheses, it's 1 minus beta times the trend from the previous month, or trend from month 1. Now once we've done that, as long as we have named our cell, or use dollar symbols before the letter and number of the particular cell, we can just go ahead and copy that formula down throughout the rest of the workbook. Just double click. These we can't actually calculate. So we can calculate a trend from August 2001, where we just picked a value, all the way through January of 2009, 1 month ahead of our last actual known sales. And you can see your forecast should have updated as well. Now to make it a little easier to see with less numbers, we can go ahead and change this to just 2 decimal places. 2 decimal places make things a little easier to look at on our screen. And we can see actual sales, and this is our forecast. This is the number that would be our final forecast, is what we expect to sell each month. When we're calculating forecast error, we're going to refer back to this cell. Right. So we actually forecast 33.95 in September. Actual sales was 31. Okay, so that gives us most of our forecasts. The only thing we need to calculate is forecast for February and March. We can use the same formula, but instead of I being 1 as it was in all of the other F's that we calculated, it's going to be 2 and then 3. So I tells you how many months in the future you're forecasting. So let me just bring this formula down to the bottom of the sheet so we can keep looking at it as I enter it. So for February, what we're looking at is FT plus I, or F89 plus 2. 89 plus 2 brings us to February. F of 89 plus 2 equals initial forecast from 89 plus 1 plus 2, because I is 2, times the trend that we calculated previously. So we could just, what we could do is not do that. What we could do is go ahead and say, in the future, as far as we can forecast in the future from this point, we will always refer to this initial forecast and this trend component, because those are the last 2 that we can calculate until we get new data. From there, we could copy the formula down and see the only difference is instead of 1 times E91, you'd have 2 times E91, then you'd have 3 times E91, right? But the trend is negative, we should have sales going down every month, right? So 2 times E91, 3 times E91. If we wanted to go another month, we'd make it 3 months in the future. I mean, yeah. If we wanted to go 4 months in the future, we change that to 4. Right. So every month, our sales will go down by 0.36 units, according to this forecast. I only want you to forecast through March of 2009. Okay. So again, these sales actual, we don't know that, so we would not fill those in. Initial forecast, we can't calculate that without a more recent, more up-to-date actual sales. And the trend, we also can't calculate without a more recent initial forecast. So those are all the forecasts we have to make. Now the next step is calculate forecast error and mean absolute percent error. Okay, so coming back to our homework assignment, I just showed you how to do this forecasting. Next we want to calculate MAPE. It'd be easier to start with the initial forecast first. Actually, I don't have this column here, but it'd be even easier if you could calculate the absolute percent error first. Absolute value of the percent error, which is just this portion of this MAPE formula. Makes it much easier. So it would just be, the first step is calculate the error, that's this part. Calculate the absolute percent error, that's this portion within the absolute value brackets. Basically turning every negative forecast error into a positive number, keeping all the positive forecast errors as positive numbers. And then figure out what is the percent error. So if our sales were 34 and we were off by 3, we're approximately 10% forecast error. This can be more useful than looking at actual number of units that your forecast is off by. And the reason I calculate that separately is it makes it a lot easier to do this MAPE calculation. Type it in one time and copy the formula all the way down throughout your worksheet. Similar to the way we copied averages down or had running totals on homework 2, I believe. But I'll show it to you. It's forecast error. The convention is to go actual minus forecast. This is similar to what you would see in the other way to write exponential smoothing forecasting formula. So here we look at equals actual sales minus forecast. That's it. And we can just copy that formula all the way down. Now what you want to do is down here where we didn't have a forecast calculated, we don't really need the forecast error because that doesn't make sense. Right, so sometimes we had pretty high errors of minus 30 units. Other times we had very small errors off by 3 or even half a unit. So that's forecast error. Again, enter it one time, actual minus forecast on the same line, straight all the way across. Error from week 1 is actual from week 1, month 1 minus forecast from month 1. Negative forecast means that our forecast was too high. Positive forecast error means that our forecast was too low. Sold 23, forecast 14.5. Next step, go ahead and calculate the absolute percent error. Equals ABS, that's Excel's formula for absolute value of whatever's inside the brackets. You need another parentheses. You don't need another parentheses actually because I already calculated error. It's the absolute value of error divided by actual. If you look back at this formula, this top part, of course, is the same as this top part. So forecast error divided by actual sales. Maybe we're going to look at that as a percent since we are looking at a percent error. And then copy that formula down through your worksheet through December of 2008. So you see here off by 2,043%. Here it didn't work because we had divided by 0. I don't believe we have any 0 cells in your data set. If you did, just to make the formulas work, go ahead and enter a number, maybe a 1. Just a small number. You could even enter 0.0001. Would just allow Excel to do the calculation. Okay, so that's the absolute percent error. Then we have the formula for mean absolute percent error. And basically, the mean absolute percent error, let's say at week 2, is just the average of the absolute percent errors from week 1 and week 2. Or month 1 and month 2 in this case. MAPE5 would be the average of the absolute value of the forecast error percentage from week 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, or month 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So to make this easy in Excel,